Hello and welcome to the first CODE AFL show. My name is Josh Barnes. I've got Ed Burke with me. We'll be together every week going through all the happenings in the AFL as we go to the end of the season. We're joined for the first time on this episode by our chief cricket writer, Daniel Cherney. We brought him in for the new ball. Cherney, welcome.
We've got the Cherry with me and looking forward to, well, there was no Cherry in the Australian squad actually, so looking forward to sending down a few overs.
Strong on the segues, Ed. Good to have you here.
Great to be here, Josh.
Let's get into the first bounce. So that'll be the early news to start. And as you mentioned, Cherney, the All-Australian squad has recently come out. Snubs galore. Cal Wilkie, Jack Higgins, Aaron Norton. How do we all feel?
Yeah, a few Saints there, Dan. Any strong feelings on that?
I think Cal Wilkie was pretty hard done by. I think I do profess some bias, but he had an exceptional season. I think he's a very, very consistent player. And I think there were probably a couple there ahead of him that I probably would have had him in ahead of. Josh Battle probably being one of those. Maybe Mark Keane. Look, don't get me wrong. None of these guys have had poor years. You don't make the All-Australian 44 without having strong years. But I think Wilkie, if I was saying who was unluckier of Wilkie and Higgins, I would have said Wilkie's the unluckier one. And Norton, I suppose it's interesting because Sam Darcy's got in ahead of Aaron Norton.
Yeah,
I think you could probably look at things the other way around and say maybe Norton could have got in ahead of Darcy.
Yeah, well, Darcy missed quite a fair bit of time with that injury. He missed 6 or 7 weeks, which would have taken him close to the edge of the eligibility. And Norton's going to finish 4th in the Coleman medal. So he's, in the end, had quite a good season. I think his start wasn't that great. But, Ed, you had him in your team. So you must be a little bit sore by the selectors.
We'll get to the teams in a little bit, I think. But, yeah, there's always one that you name in your team before the squad comes out that isn't there on the squad day. But, yeah, I was surprised by Josh Battle as well. And I think there's an element of if you're one of those teams that finishes in the top 8 or top 9, the AFL tries to get them that extra representation. And Josh Battle probably not the one I would have picked for Hawthorn alongside Jack Gunston. I thought Carl Amon would have been a good chance to feature just as an option at half back. A lot of good players in that position this season. But, yeah, the Battle inclusion very interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised. He definitely had a better season last year, Josh Battle, I think, but now he's in a better team, I suppose. So, as you mentioned, teams-wise, you've picked your team, Ed. Do you want to sort of run through any talking points from your 22?
Yeah, I think compared to a few other teams that I've seen, they're a bit out of the box. I think Josh Dacos at half-back might be one that a few don't have in there. I've got him alongside Nasiah Wanganeen-Millera on the flanks, Harris Andrews and Sam Taylor as my tall defenders, Josh Worrell in a pocket, Jordan Clark in another pocket. I think he's had a fantastic season for Fremantle. And when you look at the Dockers should have some representation in that team, I think it's Jordan Clark and potentially Luke Jackson as a second ruck. So I went with Max Gawn in the ruck. And then obviously with Sherry being left out of the squad entirely, I think it's quite likely that Gawn gets in ahead of Brody Grundy in that number 1 ruck spot.
What philosophically, Cherney, are you on the fence in terms of rucks, picking 2 rucks in the same side when if they picked Gawn and Grundy in the same team, it didn't work for Melbourne, literally?
I think the All-Australian team, if they played anyone, they'd probably win regardless of whether they pick 1 or 2 rucks.
They'd definitely start favourites if they were playing footy.
It's an interesting question. Look, I think it probably depends on the players and the seasons they've had. I think if there have been 2 standout rucks that deserve selection just because of their weight of form and you're sort of weighing them up against sort of an extra midfielder, extra half-forward flanker, extra small defender or whatever it is, I think it has to be a bit of a, it's horses for courses. Yeah. So I think this year, I could probably make a case for one. I think they've all had, all 3 of those guys. I think Sherry was very unlucky. I think they've all had good seasons without being absolutely dominant. I think Grundy certainly finished the season very strongly. Gawn is pretty consistent across the board.
Yeah.
But yeah, this year it feels like a 1 ruck year actually.
Neither of us picked Jamie Elliott, which means we might not have any Collingwood fans tuning in for episode 2. Why didn't he make yours? He was the last cut from mine.
Yeah,
we both went Heaney and Pickett probably over him.
Yeah, it would have been in my team until 2 or 3 weeks ago. I didn't have Isaac Heaney in my team until recently, but his body of work got him over the line. I think I saw a stat that he'd produced more 20 disposal, 5-goal games than anyone this season. Needs to be included, I think, on a half-forward flank and room for 1 veteran, but that went to Jack Gunston in a pocket.
Should it be weighted more heavily to guys who did the work early in the season and got their teams to the finals? So that's where I would sort of say, look, Heaney, he finished the season very strongly, pretty consistent across the board, but I think Elliott, when the whips were cracking and Collingwood were establishing that top 4 spot for much of the year, he was the guy who got it done. I suppose the other point I would make is that my phone rings, is very professional. I suppose
is it anyone important?
A little bit. The other one I would say, the other point I would make is that the wingman is always a discussion point, and whether it is a true wing or not. How do you guys see that stacking up?
Well, I've named Hugh McCluggage on a wing because I just feel like he's a wingish type of player. I reckon he played there in his first season at the Lions. You got to have, I think it's your most outsidey midfielders that you want to name in the team. You just cram in on a wing and half forward flank. I guess Ollie Dempsey, that was a hot start to the season. He was hitting the scoreboard. But in terms of pure wingmen, I don't think there were any other standouts.
He was the only one I considered just to pick a winger. And I did consider him. I've been doing the rolling team, which you've all been reading on Code Sports throughout the year. And I had him in there for the first half of the year, and I think he just sort of tapered off a little bit. And I think it comes down to if he's getting a game, Ollie Dempsey, that means a guy like Bailey Smith is probably not making the team. And Bailey Smith has just had so much more impact. So if they had the squad like that, I'm sure the coach in this mythical team would just pick Ed Richards on a wing and just stick him there just because he's a better player, would be my guess. But who knows, if it came down to a long season against Mars and Venus, we might be changing the positions around a little bit. Now, the team will be named on Thursday night, and it will be a team of 22, which is time for me to go looking down the barrel here, because I just don't understand why it's a team of 22 when on Thursday every week every team picks a 23. We always pick a 23 all week long. When we're deciding on the grand final teams, it'll be a 23. Who can come into that 23? And the AFL All-Australian team is just a 22. There's no sub. There's no extra selection. I think that's ridiculous. They should change that because that's the way footy is these days. What do you guys think?
And that was Josh's javelin on the Code AFL show. I agree with you. The team needs to be reflective of how teams line up. And I like the thought of the sub being named, an hour before the All-Australian team out of the squad.
They can wear a fluoro blazer.
Yeah, exactly. And also, can we give it to the best sub during the season? Anyone spring to mind out of someone who's been very good in that role all season?
Well, I think the other thing is if, as we expect, the sub will be eliminated and we go to just 5 on the bench next season, then you'd imagine the team would extend to 23?
I would imagine, yeah.
So then why at this stage do we not have 23? It just doesn't really make sense because, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it was 3 + 1 as the sub, they just had 4 on the bench in a 22. So it's a real, I think history will view this as a real weird oddity that there weren't 5 on the bench when for matches we have 5 on the bench, whether they're a sub, that stupid medical sub that they had for a year, which was ridiculous, or 5 on the bench.
Can they fit a 23rd person on the stage when they unveil everyone in their
when
blazers?
Howie has them sitting on the couch, it's going to mess up how many he has for each line when he has the 2 or 3 players on the couch. So season review time. Let's move on from the All-Australian. We're going to run through every team where they've gone wrong, what they need to do, and what's going on at them. Ed, you were at Carlton this morning. Exit meetings time, our favourite time of the year. It was windy. It was cold out there. What did you learn? What did you see? And then we'll get into the Blues.
It was very windy. It was very cold. And then just as I got there, Charlie Curnow gave us the slip as well. So we weren't able to get onto him to discover his intentions.
Before we go into it, what was the strategy like? We'll take the viewers and listeners inside the media strategy here. How many exits were you trying to cover? Were you working together or was it every man for himself? Who was there? How did it all go?
2 exits to man. The major television networks were there. We're the only print organisation there. So that's what you get value for money at Code Sports. We were there on the scene trying to guard 2 different exits, but in reality, Carlton probably have 3 or 4 different ways they can funnel their players out of Princes Park. So it was a bit. It's
a big park too.
I had a big decision to make at the start when I was the first one there for us, which entrance I go to. Curnow went out the other one, but he spoke very briefly and he repeated the sort of comments that he gave you, I think, in the rooms at the MCG in July, that he was adamant that he's going to stay at the club. But those noises are there for a reason. I think he has been a little unhappy at Carlton this season. I also think that the Blues will back themselves to get him happy. It isn't that uncommon, I think, for players to get dissatisfied during a season like this where they haven't met expectations. He's probably issues with his body and his own form have led to a personally frustrating season as well. So I think there's a few things there that if they get fixed up, he might end up seeing out the entirety of his contract at Carlton.
Yeah, and one thing to note with Charlie Curnow is while he did say, I'm not going anywhere, that's done to us in the rooms a few weeks ago when I was part of that sort of media pack talking to him, I asked him directly whether he actually wanted to go to Gold Coast, which was the story at the time, and then he refused to answer that question. So that part of the story has not been fully answered by Charlie. I think he still is having his eyes looking out there. It doesn't mean he can leave or will leave, but I think that's been sort of the part of the story that he hasn't sort of answered to so far. So we'll go through every club, as we mentioned before. We'll go through the likely best and fairest winners, trade and draft talk, and then an early prediction for 2026. Ed, Blues?
So if you look at Carlton's needs first, it's probably, if they're looking at ready-made players, it would be who they get in a trade for Curnow. So who's in a better position to deal with them? Is it Sydney or Gold Coast? I think there's some players from the Suns that Carlton would really like to get their hands on. Imagine a player like Bailey Humphrey coming into their midfield, giving them something a bit different in the forward half. They need ball users off half back as well. That's a massive priority for them. Players who can run on the outside and use the ball really well by foot. So I think those are the two main areas they need to address. I think they can bounce back up the ladder if they get that combination of, if they do hang on to Curnow, there's still a good chance that they can use that key forward combination to bounce up. The kind of game that they play, that contest territory game, if they can mop up a couple of things with their disposal going inside 50, they might not actually need to change that much to become a contender again.
Definitely. I'm higher on the Blues than most people. I think if you get a full season out of Sam Walsh, you get a full season out of Nick Newman, who didn't play a game, you get some running capabilities through your team and a bit of rebound off the back half, then suddenly the whole team looks a lot different. But injuries has been an issue for a long time at Carlton. Who's winning their best and fairest?
I think George Hewitt will just get it. Patrick Cripps will be there with him. Obviously not a season to the standard of his Brownlow year in 2024, but he should be out there. And Jacob Wiedering would probably round out a top three there. But I think George Hewitt will get the nod.
Now, following Carlton, we're on to Richmond. I've got them. So Tim Taranto, I think, is going to win the best and fairest there against Nick Vlaston. Will be the top two for me. Draft is interesting as always for them. With them, they have right now, as we sit here on these plush couches in our Code Sports office, they have picks 2 and 3, thanks to that infamous North Melbourne trade. That'll go back probably one with the Oscar Allen compensation for West Coast, but they're in a good position there to add another couple right into that mix. How do you see the Tigers, you guys?
Oh, look, I think clearly they're still in a rebuilding phase. And I think the nature of their season was such that because they had that just inspiring win in round one against Carlton, it just took all the pressure off them for the rest of the year. And then they had enough sort of fill-ups throughout the season. They had that great win against Gold Coast. Yeah. Sort of beat Damien Hardwick, the former coach. Went over to Perth and had a good win. Several other meritorious showings. The win against Essendon in what was dubbed the worst game of all time. And I think it was pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Actually, until they played St Kilda, that might have been even worse. But yeah, there were enough sort of there was enough there, and expectations were so low at the start of the season with the Tigers. I think it's easy to forget because of the way West Coast went that people were talking about Richmond not winning a game. So, but having said all that, I still think there could be some pain to come for the Tigers. They were the kids are good and promising, and I think there's enough coming through, and we'll see hopefully some of the guys some of the kids that had interrupted seasons get a better run at it next year. But they were still heavily reliant on the top end, many of whom are 30 plus. And, you look at a player like Nick Vlaston, who's had an outstanding season. I mean, you wouldn't have thought he's going to get much better at this stage. So if some of those older guys drop off, will the kids catch up quickly enough? This could still take a few years.
One team has actually started making cuts so far as Port Adelaide. Ed, what's your read on them?
Well, what a finish to the season. I think it was 7 first-year players. They were sending off Travis Boak, who looked a bit below his best physically. He might have been carrying something into that game. It was an extraordinary performance. They unveiled Harrison Ram at fullback. He was so impressive against Ben King. He fought really hard. That will be interesting to see how he goes in his second season because he might get the nod as that number one key defender to start next season. It's a real area of need for them. They'll hopefully have a fully fit Aliir. I think Ken said after the game that he has had a busted medial ligament.
Truths from Ken after the game. He wasn't holding back anymore.
It's fantastic. Imagine having a few different post-game press conferences like that. It would liven up the season.
If they told the truth all the time, that would be great.
But I think they're in, again, things are never as fully as bad as they seem. And this is a side that made a preliminary final with a similar mix last season. So there's a few things they need. I think they need someone else a good trusted ball user to step in across half back so they can free Connor Rosie up again through the midfield and in the forward half of the ground. And obviously with Willie Rioli's retirement news that came in yesterday, they're probably lacking a goal kicker in their forward 50, someone to support Mitch Georgiades. They'll get Todd Marshall back from his Achilles injury, and he had some concussion issues before that. Hopefully he gets a clean run at it, but they need another goal kicker as well. So that might be an area where they might be trying to snag someone during trade and free agency.
Where do they finish in 2026? Tough question.
I reckon they can push back to the fringes of the 8 if they can correct some of the imbalances in their team, because that midfield, Butters, Rosie, Horn-Francis is an incredible side. Miles Bergman as well took a massive step forward this season. I think they've got the right mix to push back for finals contention.
Most important for them will be re-signing Zach Butters, that's for sure. It's going to be the biggest job at Alberton over the next 6 months to a year. North Melbourne is next on our list. Another deflating season for North Melbourne, I guess. Fans, it hasn't been great. Where do you guys sit on them? Are you bitterly disappointed with North Melbourne? Is this what you expected they would be? How deflating is it?
I thought they'd pop. I thought they were going to pop this season. I think there should have been. Oh, I'm not sure. Was there enough pressure on Alistair Clarkson early in the season when they were underperforming? It was an odd season where you went in looking at their midfield mix thinking this is the kind of on-ball unit that should be matching most teams. Luke Davies-Uniacke, Harry Sheasel, they had the experience of Luke Parker. Tom Powers getting a big pump up over the pre-season, and Jai Simpkin had a really good pre-season as well.
Wardlaw when he's there, yeah.
George Wardlaw is
arguably the best ruck with Sherry when he's up and going.
Yeah, so that mix never quite seemed to work for them. There was a really disappointing game early in the season. I think it was Good Friday when they played the Blues and they got belted off the park. They got thrashed in the contested ball. So there were some alarm bells there. They just haven't quite been able to find the right balance in that midfield of hunting the football, but also that team defence. And it exposes a really vulnerable backline where they need to correct some personnel issues there. So I think they've been linked to Jake Lever. They might have tried to get in contact with Jack Silvani. I think they'll be having a look at someone who can hold down a key defensive role. That's an urgent area, but they also think need to find a mix of a midfield that's more accountable.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary how long it's dragged on, this backline issue. Like, we feel like we've been having this discussion for and North Melbourne people feel the same way.
The whole rebuild has dragged on this whole time.
Yeah,
It's a longer rebuild than Victoria's big build. It just goes on forever and ever. This is their best season since 2019, and they won 5 games. So it's just been such a slog for them. They need some kind of tall defender back there. They have been linked to Marcus Windhager. Apparently, they're putting an offer for him. I guess that makes sense as a defensive midfielder, but they have so many midfielders already. If they are investing funds, I would be investing it in the defence. That would just be me. But I'm sure they can fashion a defensive style midfielder from Tom Powell or somebody like that if they had to, but it doesn't seem to be working for them. Best and fairest, I'll give that to Luke Davies-Uniacke just ahead of Sherry just because of his suspension. We'll move on as we get through these teams quickly. St Kilda, you two on the couch, I'm sure have a lot of opinions on the Saints.
Oh, look, I think overall probably what you'd expect from St Kilda given at the start of the year. If you'd said they go 9-14 and finish sort of, 12th in the end, it's probably around the mark. The season didn't necessarily pan out. The wins didn't necessarily come against who you thought they would have. I suppose they did in the back half of the year, but early there was some promise. Win against Port Adelaide away, I suppose in hindsight, doesn't look as good as it did. Geelong was probably the highlight of the season, that win against Freo. The good thing for St Kilda, I suppose, is that the back half of the season was pretty consistent. That they had that run, and I think Ross Lyon has said this, they had that run through the third quarter of the season, I suppose, where they lost a lot of games to higher placed sides, but they were very consistently competitive, a lot of honourable losses. And, there's hope that the next generation coming through is promising. But clearly the biggest win was keeping Nasiah Wanganeen-Millera and the amount of hope that gives to the rest of the club. They'll bring in Tom De Koning, who I think will be an improvement on Rowan Marshall. To what degree, it's hard to say. I think De Koning his best is clearly exceptional, but he hasn't yet shown an ability to put that together for a really extended period. And obviously it's on massive money. They don't spend the draft capital. So they will just hope that the next generation comes through quickly. They've pushed through a lot of players. There's been signs through the likes of Hugo Garcia, and I think particularly Hugh Boxall in the last stage of the season was really exciting. So there's a bit to like, but they also just need a fit Max King and hopefully and fit Mateus Filippo, and then hopefully for their sake they pop. But there's still a lot of ifs.
Yeah, and we're expecting them to recruit. Obviously, Tom De Koning is coming through the door. Leka Lear is expected to come with him. If you assume that they get a fully fit Max King, Mateus Filippo who plays, do they, and potentially Liam Ryan as well has been heavily linked to St Kilda. If you add in those names and those guys all play, where does this side fit? Are they a finals team? Are they even higher, even lower? What's your expectation?
I think they should be a finals team next season if they do get those fits. The other option they get with bringing in Leka Lear is potentially swinging Anthony Caminiti back forward, where he looked quite effective in his first season. They've got a few options there. I think there could be some teething issues bringing in recruits who need to settle into a system. We've seen at Collingwood the last couple of seasons that it's often the second season that the big name recruit finds their place in the system, and that could be the case under Ross Lyon as well, just working their way in under his system. I think that there's definitely room with the first round talent that they have on their list to bounce.
Journey, what do you do with Rowan Marshall?
I think realistically, I think part of the question is, what does Rowan Marshall want to do? And I think realistically, they'd be better off testing the market at the very least. And if you can get a late first rounder for him, probably from Geelong, then you probably let him go. If you don't get any that good, then you probably keep him and see how he works in tandem with Tom de Koning. And that's obviously, there's a lot of ifs there. But I think at this stage of his career, if you can bring in a player of Tom de Koning without giving up a pick and then get an extra pick for Rowan Marshall, you probably have to do it given the stage of St Kilda's list build.
Yeah. Knowing Geelong and their negotiations last year around Bally Smith, it's going to be about pick 20 will be what you'd get. If that's offered right now, is that you saying thanks, Rowan?
Look, it's pushed back and the like, but yeah, probably is. I mean, he's 30. He probably played his best footy realistically. Can't see him getting much better. He can still be a good player. And he was almost All-Australian last year. But don't quite think he's there.
Best and fairest winner, Ed?
I think Nasiah takes the cake there.
He'd have to be pretty short odds, I think.
Carl Wilkie will actually come pretty close, I reckon, which adds to the point that he was unlucky in the All-Australian squad.
Yeah. West Coast is my team next. Question for the other guys on the couch. Is this what's the next worst team in recent times to West Coast? This is as bad as I can remember if you take out those expansion teams.
Ooh.
That is a question.
West Coast a couple of years ago. West Coast have been abject and just the weird thing about West Coast, I don't think this has been I know they've only won one game, but I actually don't think this has been their worst year of recent times because they haven't had quite the level of hidings that they had at times. I mean, they kept Adam Simpson in a year they lost by 170 points to Sydney. I mean, and they let him go into the following season. So this is not a new phenomenon for West Coast. They had some shocking losses sort of in the back half of the season. I actually thought their first 2 or 3 months were better. Obviously, they beat St Kilda, but ran Richmond close, ran Essendon close, were quite competitive against Brisbane. There were some positive signs, but they faded away, didn't they, in the back half of the year? And it's just such a long rebuild because the list is in just such a shocking state.
What do they look for with these first 2 picks? Because we're almost certain now that Oscar Allen compensation pick will be pick 2. It will take the AFL a long time to release
Secret herbs and spices.
Yep, they'll go through all that on the day that Oscar Allen announces he is leaving for Brisbane when the free agency period opens. But if they're planning to take those first 2 picks, which way do they go?
Oh, they have to take the very best talent. They don't have a chance to be picking and choosing with this. They only have one interesting midfielder, really, and that's Harley Reid. Obviously, Liam Baker is sort of a bit of a utility, but otherwise they don't have many good players. Chris Kavanagh, our draft expert, has Willem Dersma and Cooper Duff-Tytler going to them. Willem Dersma is a bit of a utility, 191 centimetres, and Duff-Tytler is a forward ruck who is very highly rated. If you're getting picks 1 and 2, they just have to nail them more than whoever they pick. They cannot afford to get this wrong because they have gotten wrong for the past 6 or 7 years. Their drafting has been dreadful outside of Harley Reid, who was a number 1 pick that you and I could have chosen. So they're just letting all these players go. The middle of the group that they, drafted around the premiership is what keeps you going if you can stay relevant and afloat, and they just didn't pick anybody, essentially. Oscar Allen was probably the one prize in that period who came through, and now he's gone to Brisbane. So they've just got an empty hole that is massive in their list. So they need to nail these 2 picks. They have 1, 2, and 12 as it stands right now with Hawthorn's pick. So they get that from Tom Barrass in that deal. So they need to nail that too, and they need to get everything right to be any chance because a 1-win team, only GWS in their first season, and then it was Fitzroy in their last season. They're the only 2 in the AFL era to have 1 win in a season. And it felt even worse than that. So it's a long hole to climb out of for the Eagles, and it's going to take quite a long time. Now Sydney is at sort of the other end. They're a good side that missed the 8, I would say. What's your read on them, Ed?
Really frustrating season for them because they were basically done by the time they got their act together. It was almost mathematically impossible for them to make the finals, and they made a bit of a go of it, but it lasted about 3 weeks, and then it was over with that loss to the Giants. So a few things for them to look at there, and it still just appears to be a key forward, and they get linked to all the key forwards who might be satisfied at their current club because that's historically what they've done is taken the big name, Lance Franklin, Kurt Tippett, Barry Hall, Plugger Lockett before that.
And they do need that at this stage. That is one of the issues on their list.
Yeah, so we had a really good report from Lockie McCurdy last week about their interest in Charlie Curnow, also that they've called on Jamari Ugle-Hagan. So it'll be interesting to see where they look. Logan McDonald didn't get out on the park at senior level this season. Joel Amadi could barely get out on the park either. But do they need to move on from that combination now because they've been trying it for a few years when they've had them all together and it hasn't really been able to click, I think.
Yeah, in 2023 they were dismal after the 2022 grand final, missed the 8, and then last year they were the best team in it for 20 weeks and sort of tapered off to the end and lost the other big grand final. Is it too silly to just assume that they will bounce straight back up the ladder like they did those 2 years?
I think you can't assume, and because especially given we don't know what's going to happen with the trade period, and I think if they don't get that key forward piece ready, sorted, then I think there's still huge. It's clearly going to continue to be an issue for them, and I don't think they're a premiership threat if it's not sorted. So I think you have to sort of wait and see what they do on that front. Clearly the injuries played a big role there, but I think by the same token, and I know that they weren't still full strength when they played Geelong, but that Geelong loss was a good one for them in the penultimate round, because I think it was a wake-up call that it's not just that because they could easily say, injuries at the start of the year and hangover from the grand final and new system, look, it was just that sort of year. And then we were actually on the right track. And in another year where the win distribution was a bit more level, they might still have pushed very close. But I think it was a couple of reminders, even against West Coast, where they're pretty ordinary in the last round of the season. Just a reminder, they're not quite there yet, the Swans. And it's even a guy, Henny's a great player, but he's also actually, he should be, I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be in his prime for. They've actually got to maximise the prime by Isaac Henny. He's into his 12th season next year. You sort of the clock's ticking a bit there.
Yeah, it felt like last year they were better than they should have been in terms of that first 20 weeks where they were just braining teams. And then it sort of got figured out when their stars don't dominate, then they're not so good. And then this year the stars were either injured or didn't dominate and they weren't so good. So they have to figure that out. Obviously, Dean Cox in his first year had a bit of, speed bumps to work through. Ed, are they making the 8 next year? Making the 4?
I don't think they'll make the 8 next season. The uncertainty over their backline. I don't think Dean Cox ever really settled on the right mix. We saw Ollie Florent drop to the VFL for 6 weeks. Matt Roberts was out of the team towards the end of the season, who most people would say is a pretty good player and a confident rebounder of the football, but he couldn't get that balance right. Dane Rampy's almost 35, hasn't signed, I don't think, for next season yet. And they don't really have a successor to him as that interceptor and defensive organiser. So they've got a few holes that they need to patch up at the other end of the ground as well as in their front half.
Yeah. Melbourne is our last team. We'll get through them quickly. They lost 6 games by under 10 points this year. Do you think that means they were closer than we think, or do you think they really are sort of sliding off the perch as the only team that got rid of a coach this year?
Max Gawn spoke in the rooms after that loss to Collingwood, and he was often the only person that they put up after losses, after games, and he could sense the deja vu as well. He was just thinking, it feels like every week I'm standing up here and there's a game that's just got away from us, and they made critical errors in the last moments. And unfortunately for the Demons, a lot of those errors in those games where it was on the line, both Collingwood games, the errors came from the senior players. They came from the big guns like Gawn, Petrarca, Clayton Oliver, turnovers from Stephen May in that Collingwood game that really hurt them. So they've got talented younger players who are building, but is there enough there with their top end, if they keep them all together, to suggest that they contend? And I'm not sure. And I think they're making that decision themselves because it affects the way that they lean with who they get as their coach.
Yeah, I just can't cop that excuse about forgetting how to win. Like, what has gone on at that club that they won a grand final, they finished in the top 4 2 years after that, so they've won a lot in a 3-year period, made the finals even before that. They had 14 premiership players on the field on the weekend, and they didn't know how to win. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Whatever has happened at Melbourne, the wheels have gone off that badly that 14 premiership players don't know how to win a game of football. And they've done it 6 times this year where they probably could have won a lot of those games and they just fell in a hole. There's just something that is just in tatters there. So let's move off that now into quick hands, as I can see our producer is staring holes through me that we've gone on too long on the first show, so we might be axed after one episode. Pre-finals bye, we're in the middle of it now. What do you guys reckon? Are you pro? We're 10 seasons into the pre-finals bye now.
Yeah, if we're going to have a bye, I'll go with a lot of experts and say it needs to be a pre-grand final bye. You can build up the grand final, and I think it's a bit easier to do than having this week off men's football during the final series.
I'm pro pre-finals bye, and I think I know you can't budget for a cyclone, but I think this is actually an example of where it does work out well. And I thought it worked better when it was the AFLW showcase round, and hopefully it still get a fair bit of extra air because there is that bye period. But no, I still think it's good. Otherwise, you would have seen all manner of players being rested last week.
Yeah, if we didn't have a pre-finals bye, we could have a wildcard game on this weekend. Cherney doesn't sound like he likes the wildcard concept. I'm just going to guess from that noise.
It's a stupid. Well, first of all, it's not a wildcard. Like, wildcards are for down the barrel. Wildcards are for leagues that have conferences or tennis. Like when you bring in someone like Venus Williams, she could be a wildcard. It's not, but yeah, exactly right. Well, it would just be a top 10. And maybe expand to a top 10 when you bring in Tassie and you've got 19 teams. It's not a wild card, and no, I wouldn't bring it in.
I think the problem with the wild card is the branding. If it wasn't called wild card, we wouldn't think it's an American concept that we don't like and we don't need that in our game. If you just called it the top 9 it'll be very clear that throughout the season you're playing for the top 9. You're playing also for the top 7. The teams that finish in 7th are guaranteed a finals berth. I think everybody would be like, this is great, we get an extra game. I think the wildcard name has spoiled it because I think an 8v9, not necessarily just this season when obviously it would be sexy with the top 9 teams, but I think most years 8v9 adds an extra good game into the fixture. If you haven't finished in the top 7, then that's your problem and you're playing for the top 7 instead of, I think everybody thinks, it devalues the top 8. We've changed that system so many times over the years. The top 8 didn't start in 1897. We've changed it a lot. If we just change it to the top 9, I think in 5 years' time we would forget about it if we had 2 good wildcard games.
I think if we made this a wildcard game on Wednesday night and 15th place Essendon had a chance to play their way into the finals, that would put a lot of eyeballs on screens on Wednesday night.
Well, we're going to have a wildcard to decide who fills that third chair every week. So Chernies at the moment is holding on. A couple more quick newses. Josh Weddle looks like he will play VFL potentially this weekend. He hasn't played in a long time. Ed, you know Hawthorn very well. Would you be bringing him back in for an elimination final potentially in Fremantle or against GWS?
Well, the Hawks haven't made his scan results official, but they have made a lot of positive noises about it and that they're considering playing him on those managed minutes. I think if he gets through, he's been so effective for Hawthorn this season. He comes back into the 22. He doesn't just start as the sub 23. In the first final. He goes into the starting 22. He's played his best footy this season off half-back. He's played most of his footy this season off half-back. The Hawks' back six looking quite settled at the moment. Would they be tempted to throw him in on a wing or on the ball, or is that too much of a workload based off his injury?
Are you disrupting that Mitch too much? Is it Jack Scrimshaw is obviously the one who is in that position as sort of that third tall, fourth tall running defender. Would that be a straight swap, or are you flicking your things around if you're Sam Mitchell and putting him on a wing and pushing someone else out? I guess Giath is the other one that would be the one in trouble.
Yeah, I think Weddle ends up on a wing. I think they stick with the defensive mix that they have. I reckon he plays a little bit higher up the ground.
And Ed, I'll stick with you. We had Spygate last week. You were there at the Bulldogs when Sam Naismith was sitting with his 206 centimetre frame in the Whitten Oval and being seen quite obviously. What should he be doing this week? Because Fremantle is not sure who they're playing. Should he be at training? What did you see on that?
The fixture tells us, so Sam Naismith, their go-to spy.
Yeah.
I think he should be deployed to People First Stadium to spy on the Suns. They're the most likely opponents next week. But we have, speaking to spies from around the competition and former AFL spies, Waverley Park is one of the better spying spots. You can invite yourself into someone's home on the Mervac estate there, get on a balcony, watch the game. There's nothing the Hawks can do about it. There's no assistant coach.
That did happen for years with a Carlton member, had one of the prime spots right on the boundary line, and the Carlton footy department was often sitting on that balcony during the day with the binoculars.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think Sam Naismith should explore that option this week.
Do we see Spygate in cricket, Cherny? Are they ever hanging around the nets or anything? Is there anything like that happening in the other sports?
If you don't tend to see opposition people around the nets, I mean, I suppose with cricket, it's like, to a degree, you know, they're batting or they're bowling. Like, there's not that many. Yes, I suppose you could be throwing variations in that, technical changes, I suppose. But no, not too much. Cricket, you do get pretty close, and the access is pretty good. So, you know, we have such great cricket reporters in this country that, you know, they don't need spies. They just read our reports.
Yeah, Bharat Sundaresan will put the footage on Twitter anyway, so you see it all.
Right.
Before we go, we're still obviously a week and a little bit away from the first week of the finals. What are you guys most looking forward to?
Geelong Brisbane. I think it'd be a great game. I think I'm really excited to see Geelong being tested again against the Lions. I love repeat finals rivalries, and these teams have played a lot in the finals of late. You got big stars playing. Love to see Bailey Smith again in the final spotlight, where he's got such a great, you know, he's showed so much in that 2021 final series. So can't wait for that game. And big finals at the G are always awesome.
That was also my look forward to, but I'll go with the other qualifying final. Collingwood going over to the Adelaide Oval for the second time in 3 weeks to face the Crows. They played the Adelaide Oval really well, the Pies. I think they'll be a little further advanced in their system than they were a couple of weeks ago. It should be a really close game. I'm most looking forward to that Saturday because usually if there's 2 interstate games on the Saturday, that means we can mostly all of us go to the pub, except the unlucky few who are sort of watching the TV. So I'll be hitting up, I'm sure, a few Sports World. Derby's always a good one. There's often going to be packed pubs and you can stay there all day long watching 2 finals. There's a ripper last year. We had that Sydney double final and then there was one afterwards. Those kind of days are the best on the footy calendar, I reckon.
There was one afterwards. There was the one when Carlton didn't score for the first 47 minutes of the
yeah,
game.
that was in Brisbane. Yeah, Matt Kennedy was upset about that. So that'll do us for the CODE AFL show. We've gone on too long anyway. We will hopefully be back next week if we don't get cancelled. Make sure you tune in. Look out for the Rich list that is coming out this weekend as well. Make sure you click on that. Make sure you click on Cherny's excellent cricket stories. He's got a big exclusive coming in the next 48 hours or so. Make sure you keep an eye out for that.